Shalom from the Netherlands. My name is Jack van der Tang. I'm speaking from The Hague, the city where I am born and live. The Hague is the capital of the world about international law, because the International Court of Justice is situated here, in the United Nations Peace Palace. Here the nations come together and fight in the juridical arena against Israel. The nations, they want to divide the land of Israel. They want to divide the city of God, Jerusalem. The battle about the land and Jerusalem is taking place here in The Hague. From the 19th till the 26th of February, we have had hearings from nations about Israel in this Peace Palace. Why? On the 25th of July 2023, all the nations had sent their opinion to the International Court of Justice about the legacy of Israel in East Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria. This is a very serious situation. The words from the prophet Joel, chapter 3, are coming alive. Here the Lord says, "For behold, in those days, and at that time, when I bring the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there, on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations. They have also divided up my land, says the Lord." We are living in these prophetic days. The Lord God urged me to organize an event in The Hague for His name, to point out His purpose according to His prophetic word. On the 3rd and 4th of July, this highly unique event will be held here in The Hague. We invite you as leader who realize that all the nations will be judged by the Almighty One of Israel if their nation will vote to divide the land of Israel. We want to center God's promises, His covenants with Israel and His coming kingdom in Yeshua HaMashiach. And this event is called the Trial, as a prophetic example for what God Himself is going to do in the near future. Leaders from the nations will visit this conference center, the World Forum, for the event called the Trial. We will sign a decree and hand it over to the World Court, the International Court of Justice in the Peace Palace. This is not just an event, but an important statement in the heavenlies. There is much to share. The testimonies that happened before this are supernatural. Many international leaders agree that this will be crucial for all the nations. Do you want to know more and want to hear the whole story? Be in contact with me through the links below. I pray that you will decide to come to The Hague and stand for your nation and sign the decree. You can register on the website thetrial2024.org. Blessings from The Hague.
At least 6 Palestinians, including a local Hamas commander, have been killed after Israel carried out an undercover raid.
9 resolutions are introduced today in the United Nations to condemn Israel.
38% of all the resolutions of the United Nations Human Rights Council have been directed at Israel alone.
History has proven when rulers or nations are going against God's land, or His capital, or His people, always there will be consequences.
I will make Jerusalem a cup that will stagger the surrounding peoples. Even Judah will be caught up in the siege against Jerusalem. When that day comes, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who try to lift it will hurt themselves, and all the earth's nations will be massed against her.
This is what's happening today. This is what we experience today. And this is what the Bible calls the end times.
There's a place in this world where important decisions are made for all nations. It's called The Hague. The city and the courts may be beautiful, but its political bias can prevent a nation from reaching its full destiny.
Why do the nations gather and regimes talk in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the princes conspire secretly against God and against His anointed. Let us cut their cords, and let us cast off their ropes from ourselves.
For those who are not familiar with The Hague in the Netherlands, it's a center for international efforts to make the world a better place. It's renowned for being the international city of peace and justice and the second seat of the United Nations. And some world leaders have referred to it as the world's capital of law.
The 100th year celebration of the Peace Palace in August of 2013, former Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, summed it up with pride.
Today, The Hague is known as the legal capital of the world, an epicenter of international justice and accountability. Here in The Hague, you help sustain and expand the rule of law. You bring the rule of law to life.
What people don't know about The Hague, that this city is not big. It has about 500,000 people. But the impact and the importance of The Hague worldwide is enormous.
It's the home of two very important international law courts. The International Court of Justice, which is linked to the United Nations, and a new court, the International Criminal Court.
Every day, tens of thousands of people in The Hague work together towards a more peaceful and secure world. It hosts international conferences such as the Nuclear Security Summit and the Global Conference on Cyberspace. It's supposed to be a neutral ground for open dialogues and constructive debates. The tremendous diversity of the place is reflected in more than 160 non-governmental organizations and hundreds of international institutions.
Behind me, you see the Peace Palace. And the Peace Palace, the opening of it was in 1913. All the world leaders came to The Hague for this special event. But at that moment, they're not talking about the Peace Palace, they're talking about the Temple of Peace. So the name Peace Palace came after the Second World War, much later. But this is the most important building for the United Nations if you talk about the court. And that court in the Peace Palace is the International Court of Justice.
The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is there for rivals between countries, between states. The ICC, the International Criminal Court, is there for prosecute individuals who stand behind the most severe and crucial human rights violations. This is basically the difference between those two legal tribunals.
Avi Bell, an international law professor, shares about a conference he attended at the Peace Palace in June of 2017. The controversial topic concerned Resolution 2334, Israel and international law.
It was designed to create the impression that international law condemns every claim of Israel to land, every claim of Israel to territory, that international law requires Israel to discriminate against Jews in matters of residence, that it requires Israel not to take steps to defend itself against terrorism, a whole host of claims, and it was trying to put this anti-Israel narrative into a legal wrapping so that people would believe that international law does not support Israel's claims.
There were many points of view, but Resolution 2334 could not be justified.
When we're talking about the courts in The Hague, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, we have to look at them the way we look at the United Nations. And they're organizations whose role in the Arab-Israeli conflict is primarily one of anti-Israel public relations. And that's what we're going to see as a result of whatever decisions they make.
Anti-Semitism has plagued Israel throughout history. But now, as the dispute over their land and the capital in Jerusalem drags on, it's time for the nations to know that Israel truly has a legal right to exist.
Anti-Semitism is so deeply ingrained in so many institutions that it's very hard to get out. That's what I really think. There's several thousand years of building it, and it doesn't disappear in a day.
Legally speaking, by international law, there is no doubt that we have the right for this land, at least from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, if not more than that. Legally speaking, that's it. Now, it's ignored almost completely by everybody, mainly by the ICC. Otherwise, they would have never dared dealing with the complaints against Israel. They would have said, it should be rejected. It shouldn't even be discussed.
If you go back to the legal documents that founded the State of Israel, go back to the San Remo Resolution, the Paris Conference after World War I, Israel has a legal right, according to international law, to this land. And not just Israel as it is right now, but to the West Bank, to the Golan Heights, to even Gaza itself. And so if you go back to those foundational, legal, international documents, you'll see a completely different story from what people are telling in the news today.
The right of Jews to settle in that land was guaranteed not just by practice and morality and religious belief, but by international law. It was anchored in the Charter of the Mandate of Palestine, which told us that the administrating power was responsible for encouraging close settlement of Jews on the land. Unfortunately, The Hague has also become one of the centers of twisting international law rhetoric into anti-Israel tools. The Hague is right now the place where there are legal proceedings going on against Israeli claims. In the International Court of Justice, the PLO is suing the United States for the alleged wrong, for the alleged crime of moving its embassy to Israel's capital, Jerusalem. Now, the PLO is doing so as in the name of a state of Palestine, which the Registrar of the International Court of Justice has decided to recognize as a state, even though it doesn't meet the international legal conditions for doing so.
In a proceeding in March 2019, the Palestine Liberation Organization, known as the PLO, as well as the PA, the Palestinian Authority, acted as an illegal state of Palestine. They asked the prosecutor at the International Criminal Court to look into Israel's alleged crimes against them.
Now, there's almost complete overlap between the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. They share the same personnel, they have the same president. By alleged crimes in the territory of Palestine, what the PLO means is things that were done contrary to what the PLO wants by Israel. The ICC is not looking at any of the real crimes committed by the the PLO and by Palestinian terrorist organizations. Instead, what it is examining is the so-called crime of Jews living where the PLO does not want them to live.
It's interesting that the decisions made in the International Criminal Court contradict the judgments made by the International Court of Justice.
I have confidence that no one will ever call them to account for this, and I think they're right. The International Criminal Court is going to go along with the Palestinian claims against Israel, just as the International Court of Justice is going along with the claims against Israel. And no one will point out the impossibility that both claims are true.
There was an Israeli foreign minister that said once, Abba Evan, he said, if the Arabs would like to have a vote, that the sun rises in the west and goes down in the east, they can have it, automatic vote. They just have to put it on the table, that's it.
Every single year we have the UN condemns and making resolutions, passing resolutions against the state of Israel, and the numbers are screaming to the sky. We have over 23 resolutions on average a year against the state of Israel, while the whole world together, with all the atrocities happening in the world, around 5 or 6 resolutions all together.
What's the bottom line? The United Nations approved Israel's statehood, but now it seems to be rampantly leading the charge against the Jewish state.
We have the UN condemns the state of Israel for killing Palestinians in the border, but on the same day we have Hamas official, I remind you, a terror organization, spokesperson, announcing at the same day 51 out of 62 people who were killed were Hamas terrorist individuals.
Many times you see the hypocrisy of the nations coming against the Jewish state, against the Israeli people. For example, in the UN Human Rights Council, you have nations like Iran, Venezuela, China coming against Israel that have these tremendous human rights abuses in their own countries, and the majority of the resolutions in these UN forum are against Israel, the Jewish state.
From the UN's lead, what's brewing in The Hague could be much more detrimental to Israel in the future.
It's ultra important to understand the developments coming from the ICC that might put Israel under a risk. And when I talk about those developments, I'm talking about the pressure that European countries putting on the ICC. So the Europeans are starting to demand some results.
The majority of Europeans want actions taken against Israel because most of the money for The Hague is coming from their countries. They want the rulings to reflect their own anti-Semitism.
What we see are people in Europe making decisions against Israel which are based on their own personal prejudices. They're actually not taking account of the facts. They're not taking account of the truth. They're actually not going on the ground and experiencing what it's like to live there, to be there, and they're making decisions based on their own biases against one nation. But they exclude the other terrible things that are going on around the world. Look at Syria, what's going on there. Look at what's happening in Iraq, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia. Terrible miscarriages of justice on a daily basis, on a tremendous scale.
I don't see resolutions about North Korea or Cuba or Syria or whichever country may be, but specific on Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. What we see is that there is enormous bias against Israel, and I think when we are here with this parliament in the city of justice and peace, it's a specific obligation of our parliament to be against such a bias.
The Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC, the court which targets the most horrendous war crimes around the world, is currently addressing war crimes committed by Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas in Gaza. He already has 17,000 children recruited to participate in hostilities against Israel. Also, at least half of the 30,000 Palestinian children have been raised on values of hatred and war.
So we have Palestinians working 24/7 in order to attack the state of Israel, to drag the state of Israel from the back door to the ICC.
As recently as April of 2019, another complaint or request was filed with the ICC to open an investigation into Palestinian war crimes.
This case is against Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PA, for crimes against humanity he committed against the civil population of the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. And we're talking about imprisonment, we're talking about torture and even murder against each and every individual that dared to criticize Abbas himself or his government.
The tide of opinion against Israel doesn't seem to be changing. Currently, The Hague and the UN are the premier man-made centers of justice and have ruled the world for 100 years. However, the New Jerusalem in the time of the millennium will be much more powerful. The Messiah himself will reign for 1,000 years and he will rule with truth.
Today, the leaders of the world nations gather frequently, and they'll gather in the capitals of the world. They'll gather in Paris, they'll gather in Washington, or they'll gather in The Hague. But in the Bible, there's only one city where the nation leaders are meant to gather, and that's Jerusalem.
This is what we are seeing now. We're facing a new world order. The nations of the world are not willing to accept the rules of the word of the God of Israel.
Isaiah chapter 2 says that the law of the Lord will come forth from this city. So there's really a battle going on between who is the rightful legal heir to this world. Is it man there in The Hague, or is it the Lord himself here in the city of Jerusalem?
One of the most important descriptions of the city of Jerusalem, the essence of the city of Jerusalem, is described in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 16. It says, "Speak truth to one another, render true and perfect justice in your gates." But in Hebrew, it's so much more rich in Hebrew. Ela hadvarim asher taseh dibru emet ish et riehu. Speak emet, one to his fellow. Emet umishpat shalom shivtu b'sha'arechem. Emet, truth. Mishpat is justice. And shalom, of course, is peace. The prophet says that in the city of Jerusalem, you have three pillars that you need to focus on and you need to speak about. Emet, Mishpat, and Shalom. Truth, justice, and peace.
That's interesting. Three things: truth, justice, and peace. Then in the Mishnah there is an explanation. Why three? Because they say the world is sustained on three pillars: truth, justice, and peace. And then why three pillars? Why not four? Why not two? Why exact three pillars? And the answer is, if you have a table with four legs and you cut off one leg, the table will still stand. But if you have a table with three legs and you cut off one of the legs, the table will collapse. And that's also with the world. If one of the pillars is not there, the world will collapse. It's interesting that The Hague is called the city of peace and justice, in that order. But you need the truth to have justice, and then there will be peace. So how can you start with peace? And that's what we are missing, the truth.
And part of the process, the peace process, has been where organizations and people tried to hide the truth. And when you try to hide the truth, distrust, mistrust comes into play. But yet one tiny nation is judged by many, many nations because of their personal prejudices against that nation. And it can't be right, and it isn't right. But actually we know that justice will take place for Israel, but it'll take place in Jerusalem when God judges Israel and judges all the nations of the world through his own lens of truth and true justice.
There are 12 kilometers of books about international law in the library of the Peace Palace. There is no place in the world that have so many books about international law. But one law is not there. And I have brought it in with the this conference about international law, I brought in a Torah scroll. And this Torah scroll was placed just in the middle that everybody can see him. And I said to everybody, the international law is very interesting, but one day this law, and then I walked to the Torah scroll, I opened the ark where the Torah scroll was in, I said, this will be the international law, and that will be not going out from The Hague, but from Jerusalem.
Jack frequently takes visitors and friends on a tour of the entire Hague, and most of them come to the same conclusion.
To see that The Hague is the counterfeit of Jerusalem. They are seeing that something spiritual is going on, and that this city is not the city that God had mentioned, but that Jerusalem will be the city in the end times, and that the real law, God's law, the real law who will bring real peace, that will go out of Zion and not from The Hague. And that's the shock what they see, because they understand this The Hague, this city is the counterfeit, and that's not the real city of law.
And that's not the only concern in The Hague. We may be witnessing a major end-time event taking place sooner than we think.
There is something spiritual going on. And it's very interesting that the Peace Palace in June 2020, the world leaders of the religions are coming together, and they will sign there a covenant about friendship. There will be a pact between all the world religion leaders. And that's so interesting. We're coming closer and closer that the world order will be very strong, and that this place will be very, very important for the future of humanity.
It will happen in the end of days. The mountain of the temple of the Lord will be firmly established as the head of the mountains, and will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths." And now, O kings, be wise. Be disciplined, O judges of the earth.
To find out more on how you can stand for the truth about Israel with us in prayer and financial support, simply go to ictip.org.